An error occurred on Twitter. Okay, there's usually wait a moment, try again. All right, so we should be live. Oh, still an error. Okay, dude, what are you doing, man? Can I just we'll just remove the Twitter one. All right, we're moving Twitter because something's going on there. All right, let's just make sure we're okay. Looks like all right, we're live. Check. Brian Dish, can you hear me? Drewski, can you hear me here? Let's see. Check. Check one. Check. Can hear and see both of you. Okay, cool, says Brian. All right, good. Right on, man. All right, Andrew, appreciate you. Let's make sure we got everything in good order. All right, looks like we are on the air. People can hear us. They can see you, Andrew. I hear you, so I know we're good to go. So, hey, man, welcome aboard once again. Appreciate
good
that.
to be with you. Ask me anything.
Well, one thing I want to do is I want to bring up this. I'd like for you to talk about it, actually. This is going to be you, and I'm not going to show the whole thing, but this, can you see my screen? Yeah. So this is Andrew's simple, and someone named Shapiro, simple address Social Security insolvency. You can see I got some highlights in here. And I'd just like Andrew to talk about that because I think it's actually quite interesting. Let's remove that because that's his Social Security backup plan. And I so Andrew, I just turn it over to you.
Sure. I co-authored this piece with Kristen Shapiro, who's a lawyer in Washington, D.C. And if you read the paper, there's clearly a mix of responsibilities in the sense we touch on legal issues and we touch on policy and number crunching issues. You can imagine how that gets divided up. But what we were looking at was, everybody says, okay, well, and I've been in the Social Security reform game since the late 1990s. People say, well, Congress, pretty soon they got to act in this. The trust fund's going to run out, and so on and so forth. And we're getting closer and closer, and nothing is happening. And so we're trying to say, well, what happens if you get to 2032, which is the best guess now, when the retirement trust fund runs out? You say, what happens then? And the narrative is that, well, at that point, you need a roughly 23% across the board cut in benefits, meaning rich and poor, new retirees, old retirees alike, get a 23% cut in benefits. And our read of the law is that that's half correct. That when the trust funds run out, the way you like to call the Anti-Deficiency Act and all that, the Social Security can't borrow. It can't use money other than what comes in through payroll taxes and a little bit of revenues from income taxes on benefits. So at that point, the correct thing is, yes, you would have to cut benefits by 23%. But what is wrong is this idea you have to cut them across the board by 23% for rich and poor alike. And the reason we think that is worth combating is that produces, I wrote a whole book about how Americans don't face a retirement crisis. But the reality is if you cut benefits 23% for low-income seniors, that is in fact a retirement crisis. I wrote a study 20 years ago on how millions of people thrown into poverty and all that. And my fear is when Congress looks at this, they say, well, what we're looking at is a 23% across the board cut for rich and poor alike. We can't let anybody fall into poverty. So they're just going to raise taxes to cover the whole deal, or they're going to borrow to cover the whole amount. And that's either the biggest peacetime tax increase in history. It's a massive increase in debt at a time that I'm pretty sure the financial markets aren't going to be happy to see that. And what we show is if you look in the law and you look at legal rulings, that if you have a case where a government program has promised more in benefits than it has in resources to pay, what the courts have said is the executive branch, meaning the president or the Social Security commissioner on his behalf, has the right to prove sort of reasonable adjustments to those benefits. Meaning, they can't just be arbitrary, like my friends get benefits and the people don't get benefits. But if it's sort of non-arbitrary and passes a basic rationality test, the executive branch has that discretion. So what we said is, okay, if the trust fund runs out, we don't have to cut them across the board. I ran the numbers on it. I said, what you could do is you could pay full benefits to essentially kind of the bottom half of the sort of retiree income distribution. Yeah. Anybody receiving monthly benefits up to a little over $2,000 per month could get their full amount. So that means minimum 20, it doesn't mean minimum, means anybody getting less than $24,000 a year for single or $48,000 a year for a couple, their benefits wouldn't be cut. But anybody above that, we just capped their benefits, meaning if you're owed anything up to $2,000 a month, you get whatever you're owed. If you're owed over $2,000 a month, you get $2,000 a month. And so, the higher up, the income distribution you go, the bigger, the people at the top are looking like a 40% benefit cut. But what this does is it means for half of the population, the lower income half, there's no benefit cut at all. There's no increase in poverty at all. Even at the middle, you can get $48,000 a year as a couple before your benefits are touched. And so you say, well, why do we want to do this? And it's the reason to reframe the debate. Let's say you go into this trust fund insolvency date 2032. Congress isn't doing anything. If you have you just say a fiscally responsible president, he could just say to
Come on, man.
he could say to Congress, look, Congress, I want you to pass legislation that's for the long term. But in the short term, if you don't pass Social Security reform legislation, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to protect the bottom half of the income distribution, so there's no increase in poverty. And then for the top half, we're just going to cap benefits. In our view, that sets the debate where it should be set.
And it doesn't need congressional legislation.
It does not. This is the thing. It does not.
Right.
The president by himself cannot put new revenues into Social Security. So the reality is you would have to cut benefits. There's no question about that. But by saying the president can do this by themselves, they can then protect against this disastrous situation, which would cause Congress to panic and have this massive tax increase, massive increase in borrowing. You say, look, this is our baseline. We're going to protect the bottom half of people. On top of that, the policy debate is essentially how much do we want to raise taxes to pay higher benefits to retirees who are in the top half of the benefit distribution. That, in fact, is the entire debate we should be having over Social Security. Nobody's saying we should be throwing retirees into poverty. And to be honest, protecting retirees against poverty is simple because their benefits are so low anyway, and there's so few of them. It is the rich people which is bankrupting. So,
yeah, what I'm saying.
And we're going to talk about all the equity of it, but that's just the fiscal reality.
Yeah, what I'm saying.
The decisions we need to take. So
that's when I was read that you attacked me personally, Andrew, because you said I'm being facetious, but starting in 2033, my earliest year of eligibility is 2032. And you said, well, Josh, you're going to get a max of $2,050 a month. Now, we're just laying down the baseline here that we'll just say it'd be JD Vance. JD Vance can say, if you guys don't act, this is what we're going to do is give everybody a max of $2,050 a month. And that we'll keep that going because that will still be 78% of the benefits. But it doesn't have to be, like you said, proportionally to Grandma Jones and Josh Scanlon, if that makes sense. Yeah. It was a very interesting argument to make. It says this is the way it's going to be. And I think it actually gives the executive quite a bit of leverage in that regard to get something done.
It was something we didn't really realize, or I didn't realize. But Kristen is strong on the legal front and knows this from other contexts. She's like, look, you've got discretion here.
But where is she? I don't know. She's from a law firm. I didn't quite see.
She is a Baker Hostetler, which is sort of a big DC law firm. And she does kind of like it's called appellate work. So she's not like in there representing.
So she has a legal mind to say, hey, this
she's very big on these sort of big picture governmental kind of questions.
Gotcha. Right.
And so it's the way we think about it, it just focuses the questions on where they need to be, which is, kind of how much do you want to raise taxes on rich people in order to have higher benefits for rich people? And I mean, just for context, let's say you're the person who's getting the maximum benefit under our plan. It should be $48,000 for a couple. You'd still be getting twice as much as if you were the same people but living in Canada. It just gives you some context.
Yeah.
Social Security in the U.S. is unusual for the high level of benefits it pays to rich retirees. Yep. Just for some context, pulling some data from the OECD, which is a sort of international organization that compiles this kind of stuff. And if you take somebody in the US who makes 3 times the national average wage, so they're making about $225 a year, and they would get a Social Security benefit equal to about 21% of their pre-retirement earnings, like a replacement rate of 21%. Now look at countries that are similar to us, so not like France, or whatever, but like Australia, Canada, Ireland, New Zealand, and UK. Take those same people earning 3 times the national wage there. They don't get a benefit equal to 21% of their pre-retirement earnings. They get 7%.
Yeah, it's crazy.
And the point of this is a lot of people are like, well, I want my benefits, and I get it. But the thing is, just going forward, we're making plans not for just for 2032, but for decades past that. Do we want to be running this kind of system that we're paying very high benefits to people who are already the richest people in the world when the government is on its way to going broke? And I mean, I'm working on a piece right now talking about this dynamic of how much we pay to rich people. And my prediction is at some point, people are going to say, we bankrupted the U.S. government for this. It's not like you're not bankrupting the government, to win World War II or the Cold War thing. You're bankrupting it so that a rich couple can get $100,000 a year in Social Security benefit. It makes no sense when you get a little distance from it.
My man Steven says, is that James Baker's firm, Secretary of State under first Bush? Is that James?
It's possible, but I don't know for sure.
Well, either way, they're a big DC firm. So good question.
Yeah, they are a big firm. It is possible that it is.
Talk about, this is interesting too. So we have OASIDI, and in your piece, you mentioned that DI is actually fine. It's the OASI portion.
Yeah. Well, the DI thing is kind of weird because, I've been in this for a long time. If you think about the sort of 2010 era, there's a big concern over the disability insurance program. Yeah. And it's kind of strange. You say, well, now it's fine. What's happening?
Right.
And essentially, because it was predicted to go insolvent in 2016, and this could be the dry run for Social Security reform. For the retirement part, say, oh, the trust fund's going to go run dry. Congress, they have to act now, and everybody knew the DI program had all sorts of issues. That it wasn't just a financing thing. It was just you had people getting DI who had. I'm not saying they're scammers. There was just, you had what's called residual work capacity.
We had judges in West Virginia who just basically rubber stamped them all.
Yeah, and you had some outright fraud. I was there when this stuff happened. And and you knew, and we knew from looking at the data, you had some disability judges who just approved everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
So 2016 comes, and the trust fund's going to run out. Does Congress reform the program? No, they don't. They just take money from the retirement program and stick it into disability. Oh. So that was enough to keep disability.
Oh, wait, that's what happened? They just took it from OASI and put it to DI?
They just redirected the payroll taxes. Some of the money went to DI. That's the reform. And so if you're someone who's pessimistic about Congress coming up with something sensible, that was your dry run of things. But in addition, disability claims dropped a lot.
Right.
And it's been kind of hard. People said, well, why has it happened? And various analysis of it and all that. But there's one that came out maybe 6 months ago from somebody at National Bureau of Economic Research. And they looked at an initiative that was done at Social Security during the time, actually, when I was there.
Yeah.
And it was giving additional training to the disability judges about what the standards that the law sets. And you could see as this training worked through, like the new hires got it. Then once the newly hired judges got it, they looked at, other judges who had more experience. They kind of worked their way through. When people got this training, you found the disability approval rates dropped. And that had a big contribution to the system's solvency. So it's something where, a program like disability is more complex than retirement. Retirement, you show your birth certificate, earnings records, you get your benefit. Disability is really, really subjective. But once they trained the judges better, and that's just not gotten enough kind of publicity because it's not fraud, because people are claiming it was perfectly legal what people were doing. They're like, look, I got back pain and an emotional problem, and the judge says you can have it. But they were just being too lenient on this. And so the DI program is in better shape now. But it still has some issues. Once people go on DI, they never get off DI, and you'd like to work on that. But it really is the retirement program.
Yeah, 100%.
And analytically, it's a much more straightforward problem.
But I guess my question though is the DI is once you hit your full retirement age, you're no longer on disability insurance, you're on the retirement part. So why, I guess if DI is now fully funded, why don't they just do the shenanigans and replace some of the DI money that's fully funded with the retirement? I don't know how much that helps.
When you read that, okay, the trust fund is going to run out and you got to cut benefits, across the board, those numbers assume, and I don't know why the actuaries do it because it's not literal law. They assume that the programs are essentially merged financially and they just get the same benefit.
Okay, gotcha.
I don't think that's going to happen because you're not going to hurt the most vulnerable people, and these people are disabled and their benefits are not incredibly high. So the savings are not huge there. It's like Willie or whatever the bank robber. You got to go where the money is.
Right, what I'm saying. So your proposal, just again as the baseline, $2,000 a month, that would discourage people from taking beyond 62, which I think would make it more solvent, right? Because more and more people.
It would be technically, if you look in the paper, the maximum primary insurance amount would be set at $2,050.
Oh, the PIA would be $2,000.
PIA would. Right, so that you get the incentives to claim early or late wouldn't change. Probably people would delay claiming. This is going back a long way, what's called a Social Security notch, where people's benefits were cut in a very short order. And the evidence is very clear that people worked longer to make up for the benefits. So people probably would work longer.
Understood. I mean, you're gonna make the PIA $2,050. Okay, I get that.
Yeah, you make the PIA, and so your actual benefit will depend on when you claim, and you'll have still auxiliary benefits and things like that.
And folks, before you scream bloody murder, Andrew, he's not advocating this. He's just necessarily just saying at the end of the day, this is a way the president could manipulate the benefits to say, hey, we don't have to raise taxes or cut benefits, but I need legislation on my table to get something done, or else it's just as thinking outside the box, which I think is fantastic.
Well, I mean, this would be solvent. This would
make it solvent.
Absolutely. Without tax increases. Look, if you want to raise taxes in order to pay those additional benefits, that's people's choice. I personally wouldn't do it because I'm a low tax guy. But if that's what people want to do, they can. But it sets a baseline where you're not having national panic of 20 million people thrown into poverty or something like that. Because Congress is bad at making policy even in the best of days. If they've got this threat of 20 million people or whatever it is going thrown into poverty, again, think how Congress acts during times of crisis, COVID or financial crisis, whatever. They just start throwing money around and borrowing without much sense. So this is to avoid the crisis and then just say, oh, look, we got choices. Do we want to pay more to get more? I mean, a couple of years ago, this is probably 5 years ago, I commissioned a survey question. There's a long-running survey run by RAND, which is a think tank out in California. And the survey question asks people, it says something along the lines of, if you wanted to have more retirement income, more income in retirement, would you rather pay more into Social Security and get more from Social Security, or would you rather pay more into an account, IRA, 401k, and get more from that? Yeah. And the responses came, they're very uniform across different demographic groups, but basically a 3-to-1 margin. People would just rather save more on their own.
On their own.
That's exactly the choice we face now. Yeah. Social Security's promised benefits it can't pay. The payable level of benefits is 23% lower. So if people want more than that, do you want to pay higher tax Social Security or just want to save more on your own? That's the choice. So, and I think overwhelmingly people trust themselves more than they do.
Yeah, they like liquidity too. I mean, as they have saved more.
And I think that the evidence is clear. High income people in particular, if you reduce their benefits, they will work longer, they'll delay retirement, they'll save more. The evidence is very clear on that. What that means is if you cut their benefits by $1, their retirement incomes are not going to fall by $1. They're going to fall by much less than $1 because they'll work more and save more to make up the difference. That also happens to be good for the economy. I'm just kind of rambling here, but the Congressional Budget Office they've got an economic model, and they looked at they said, what would happen to the economy if we simply, come 2032, we cut benefits to the level that's payable?
Right.
The 23% cut.
Right.
And they said, okay, you're gonna have a short-term hit to the economy because people's benefits are gonna fall, less to spend. It'll be very much a demand-driven sort of Keynesian kind of thing. But they're like, very quickly, it's gonna recover to where it was before because people are gonna work more and save more to make up for the loss. By 2050, they say the economy, GDP, will be about 5% larger. Now, that's a huge effect. Tax reform or all these things aren't going to do stuff like that. But think of it this way: if the economy, if 5% of extra GDP, government roughly gets about 20% of GDP in taxes. So revenues rise by around 1% of GDP, and you've already cut spending by around 1% of GDP because of your lower Social Security. Right. That's an extra 2% of GDP. Improvement in your budget. At that point, your long-term budget crisis is solved, basically. Yeah.
And on top of that, the people who are going to work longer are the white-collar people who are working. You and I, Andrew. You know what I'm saying?
This is a solvable problem, but it really is. It's just, I don't want to say it's politics. Obviously there is the Democrat versus Republican thing, but it is members of Congress. There's always the temptation to say, I'm just going to do nothing. Right. If you ran like a private sector pension and it's out of balance, you got to do something this year to fix it. If you run a state and local pension, they're kind of messed up, but they still have to act this year. With Social Security, you can just say, I'm not going to do anything. And so for 40 years, members of Congress like, well, I could tell you some bad news. Your taxes got to go up, benefits got to go down, or I could do nothing. Right. And literally for 4 decades, they've done nothing. It is, again, this goes to the, if we end up going bankrupt and have a financial crisis, you're going to look back and say, this is the most freaking absurd, preventable problem.
And remember, folks, bankrupt doesn't mean they don't pay. It just means it doesn't have the ability to pay the promised benefits. This bankrupt is not, there's no dollars left. It just doesn't have the amount to pay dollar that they promised. That's what bankruptcy means.
Yeah, people say, bankrupt, you can't say Social Security is going bankrupt. I don't use the term very much because it just gets people worked up. But bankrupt is in fact the correct term. It's
right. It absolutely.
If you have a company that goes bankrupt, typically people get around 80 cents on the dollar back. They don't get zero. Well, with Social Security, you'd be getting around 80 cents on the dollar. Right. It would be a very, very similar to any other bankruptcy. In that sense, at least. In other senses, it'd be very, very different.
Yeah, but a lot of people think, Andrew, bankrupt means they don't get anything. And I'm like, no, that's not how it works.
No.
Talk about the Australian. You had posted a couple of things. The Australian model. That's of interest to me. So talk about that.
Well, it's okay. Australia is an interesting case. President Trump mentioned the Australian retirement system several months ago. Saying, we're looking very closely at it. He talked a little bit about expanding retirement accounts in the State of the Union. I'll just tell you how the Australian system works. They essentially have a minimum benefit that everybody gets, that everybody's eligible for. It would be, it's equal to about, for a couple, I think it's equal to about 40% of the national average wage. So the dollar terms, I can't tell you what it would be. Here, it would be equal to, I don't know, $25,000 a year, something like that. But then on top of that, every worker, and that's cheap, that costs very little to provide. But every worker also is offered a 401k or similar at their job, and their employer contributes 12, it's currently 10, it's going up to 12% of pay to that retirement plan. So you got this minimum benefit that it guarantees you won't go into poverty, which Social Security doesn't. And then you have universal retirement plans on top. And what they do at retirement is, if your income and assets are above a certain amount, they means test the minimum benefit. So it's still 2/3 of people get at least, about half of people get the full minimum benefit, and about 2/3 get at least something, and then maybe a third get nothing. But long term, what this does is, their long-term cost of this system is about 2% of GDP. Our long-term cost for Social Security is about 6% of GDP. So people are like, well, Australia's not as generous. I'm like, yeah, but you get an extra 4% of GDP that you can use on something else. Your taxes can be way lower because they've got a program where the government does what government is good at, which is taking money from one guy and giving it to another guy. Government's terrible at like saving and pre-funding. They won't do that. So they say, okay, the saving part, that's all going to go to these, 401k type plans. We're going to make sure everybody has one, everybody's enrolled, everybody's getting a contribution to it. The point I made in my book, The Real Retirement Crisis, available on Amazon, is that if you were inventing Social Security from scratch today, you would set up a system like that.
Yeah.
I mean, the UK's retirement system is very similar to that. New Zealand is very similar to that. It just makes sense. Government does what government is good at. Individuals and private markets do what they're good at. You guarantee against poverty, you build savings, which is good for the economy. The only reason people talk about we got to keep Social Security going as it is because it's already there. It's like there's this saying, the worst justification or in business for doing something is because we're already doing it.
Right.
And it's absolutely why people say we got to continue paying $100,000 a year to rich people Social Security. There's no policy justification at all. Nobody else on earth does it. But it's this inertia, but you're going to inertia yourself into bankruptcy. I mean, it is a massive amount of money we're spending on this stuff to no great effect.
I want to show you some on your article, if I can find it here. Yeah, so I thought this is pretty interesting. Let's see. I just want to I highlighted it. Andrew, hang tight for just a second. Yeah, we were talking about that. Actually, let me just double check because there's something else you had said in here. No money, right here. This is one of them. The appropriations clause of the U.S. Constitution provides in no uncertain terms that no money shall be drawn from the Treasury, but in the consequence of appropriations by law. And I still think at the end of the day, if we go back to this article you had written, I think you and Alicia Monell had written this a year or so ago. 2 years. Oh, wait, I just screwed something up. You still okay? What did I do, man? Hold on a second. All right, I gotta go here. I want to share this with you. The case for using subsidies for retirement plans to fix Social Security. And so the issue that I've run into with some people say Congress can't just allocate money. I'm like, well, they can if they pass a law for that. And I'm just wondering, have you had any thoughts going back to what you and Alicia Monell had written about getting rid of 401k deductions and maybe using that money to furnish Social Security so we wouldn't have the drastic cuts for basically the above the median.
Let's say you went with something like the Australian plan or some of these things that the president talked about, where everybody gets a retirement plan at work.
Yeah, right.
Once people have a retirement plan, the tax preference for retirement savings really doesn't do much to increase your savings. The tax preference has a massive effect on saving in a retirement account versus saving in a taxable account. In effect, and if you're interested, I can explain effectively what the tax preference retirement savings does is it exempts you from capital gains taxes. And so that's really valuable to a higher income person. I mean, like if you're making less than $100,000 a year, your capital gains rate is 0.
Yeah, right.
So for kind of a lower middle income household, unless you're getting an employer match from your 401k, you're probably better off with a taxable account. And the reason is you can withdraw without penalties and you don't have all this rigmarole with it. But for higher income people, it's exemption from capital gains. But what the evidence when researchers have looked at this is it affects where people save. It doesn't seem to affect how much they save. I mean, and here's a way to think about it. I mean, imagine if you're paying 20% capital gains rate. And imagine you want to save $1 million by the time you're retired. If you were paying 20% capital gains, you'd have to save, X amount per year to do it. If we say, okay, now you're doing a retirement account, you have to save 20% less in order to reach that target. So this is what economists call an income effect. And it's what it means is it makes it cheaper to reach any retirement savings target you have. Now, it does sort of raise the effective rate of return of savings. So there's going to be this other effect, which causes people to save more. But these seem to be basically offsetting. So it's the total preference for retirement savings, or the income tax size, about $200 billion a year.
Right.
It's a massive amount of money, the majority of which goes to people in the top fifth, the top quintile income distribution.
Absolutely.
Households make on average $400,000 a year. So basically, you're giving money to people who are no danger at all of any sort of poverty in retirement. And you're doing it through a process that doesn't, in fact, raise the amount they save for retirement. Now, look, if money grew on trees, who cares? Whatever. Right. But if you're staring down the barrel of a government bankruptcy because of excessive debt, the first thing you want to cut is money that goes to people who don't need it and doesn't accomplish the goal of what the program is. And that's the retirement tax preference. That's what it does. I guess what I'd say in terms of practicality, you've picked the two most hated papers that I've done. I mean, it's
that's fine.
Yeah. So it's like, however, we go down this, but it's with the tax preference. I mean, there's people in the financial industry got really upset about it.
Right. I know they did.
Terrible. I'm like, okay, it may be terrible. I'm like, but is it true? Nobody actually disputed the evidence that we presented that this thing doesn't really raise retirement savings. And I just explained to you kind of why it is, that it's, it's people all, and this is sort of a Republican problem where, if Democrats' problem is we need a spending program for any goal, Republicans like we need a tax cut for any goal. Republicans think, despite all the rhetoric, we trust the American people to make their decisions. They think people won't save a penny for retirement unless they get a tax break to do it. But the evidence really, even the economic theory says this may not increase your savings. The evidence is it doesn't really increase savings. And it's $200 billion a year.
That we're subsidizing the wealthy. That's my whole thing.
It is essentially a tax break for rich people.
Absolutely.
Look,
I know people hated it because like, wait, that's my tax break. Yeah, but it's not doing anything in terms of like what you're saying, increasing your retirement security. It's just not.
So the usual stuff you get is, people sort of more on the left will point out, this thing doesn't really raise retirement savings very much, and it's going to people who we don't care. I mean, look, if you're $400,000 a year and you haven't saved, you end up with a 70% replacement rate instead of 80%. Look, it's none of the government's business. It doesn't matter. But the leftist critique is always something like, well, we need to take this and instead of giving it to rich people, give it to poor people to save retirement. But look, they're already getting like an 80% replacement rate from Social Security, so they don't need it either. Why don't you take that money instead, and instead of raising taxes to pay what you need for Social Security, use that money to fill the gap? So we're just looking at a variety of different ways to kind of avoid this disastrous outcome. And, if we have one advantage in sort of in the federal government, is we do an enormous amount of waste. I mean, it's, the retirement savings tax preference doesn't really raise retirement savings. The mortgage interest deduction doesn't really raise home ownership. It just causes you to get a bigger home. It drives up home prices. You got this other stuff. I mean, step up in capital gains. There's a lot of low hanging fruit you could use to generate some revenues. So, I mean, look, a lot of these programs I would cut, but I recognize I'm not going to get my way. You're going to need some money. Take it from that. Don't take it from raising people's taxes, because that deters work and savings in a real way. So you just need people in Congress and the executive branch who are in fact better at doing their jobs. And, I mean, I hate to put it that way, but, I wrote something, or maybe it's not out yet, but kind of looking at I wrote something recently on Substack saying, we don't need a Social Security Commission. We need a retirement committee. We need to look at, Social Security and retirement savings holistically. And I said, well, okay, what would this look like? And I pointed to a report from Australia about their retirement system, another report from the UK. And my Substack is called Little Known Facts. It's totally free. I'm not going to hit you up for $3 a month or whatever. But if you get a chance, go there and read this thing. It's called We Don't Need a Social Security Commission. And look at those reports from Australia and the UK. The thing that will shock you is you'll click on this, you'll read it, and you'll say, I have never seen a US government report that looks anything like this. In the sense, it's detailed, it's fair-minded, it's not full of political bullshit. It's just like smart people looking at problems in a sort of a dispassionate way, calling on evidence.
I had it up here a second ago. Let me find
Congress, to be honest, is currently incapable of producing.
Here's
Maybe you could do it, but Congress itself can't do these things.
Here's the piece right here, and I'll put a link in the show notes. We don't need a Social Security Commission, and you go down here and say we need a retirement commission right there. What is really needed is a retirement commission. And very interesting article, very interesting piece, and I could not agree more. And I'm going to put the link in the show notes. And again, this is on Andrew's Substack, which you can get for free, and you should. There's really no reason not to. In fact, it's interesting too because Andrew had also just written a stupid, well, not his stupid piece, but the stupid piece about does a typical American. Let me show this. This friggin' just pissed me off. I was like, come on, people. Do people still fall for this crap? Let me bring it up here.
They do.
Well, I actually think they do because I just think they're, the people are pushing it just they're not very well, just not curious people. Right here. The typical American, I thought this was pretty funny. What you said right here, the NIRS, but I liked what you said right here. CBS News tells us that we're all going to die, essentially. And you said in here something about this generator. It's very good for them to generate a lot of clicks. I said, yeah, indeed. And then you said right here, can you all see this? Let me just make sure. Yeah. This funny. Back in 2020, I fact-checked NIRS claimed that a plurality of older Americans, 40%, only receive income from Social Security. A more accurate answer, of course, is it's only 4.5%.
So they're off by a factor of 10. And
exactly.
I was talking to a reporter offline about this. I was like, how do you even give credence to this stuff? I mean, like how many, every report they do is terrible. It's like, how many times do I have to show this before you say, well, I'm not going to do a single source story on this? Because it's, usually in reporter school, they say, okay, look, if you write a story on one thing, call somebody else for contrast. I mean, if I put out a report and, somebody's going to cover the news, they always call somebody more left-leaning than me, and I'm fine with that.
Right.
But so much of this stuff, they're like, I'm in a hurry, I just want to get this story out. And if they just checked around, people are like, yeah, that's kind of bullshit. I mean, and the reason, just to go quickly through it, is they said the median person has a little under $1,000 in retirement savings. So I was like, okay, let's say you're somebody who works for federal government, state government, local government. You almost all of them have a defined benefit plan, which is pretty generous.
Right.
And yet, if you don't have a retirement account, they count you as having no retirement.
Exactly.
Or if you look at, very poor people, who are, say, the bottom fifth of the population, people are like getting means tested benefits like Medicaid or something. Should they be trying to save for retirement? And the answer to that universally is no, because they get a high replacement rate from Social Security. Okay, take them out of it. And say, what about people who are young? I mean, this most economists think if you're in your 20s or even up to mid 30s, you should not be saving for retirement. You should wait until your income rises. This is your life cycle model and all that.
Right, exactly.
So it's like, okay, take out people under 35. At that point, the median among all people is $20,000. So 20 times what they said it was. And contingent on having a retirement account, the median is $70,000.
Right.
So look, it doesn't mean, we don't know whether that's enough or not. The reality is retirement savings are higher today than they were in the past. So if people are not starving to death in retirement today, they're not going to be in the future. But the point is, if you just look at this in a fair-minded way, you don't get those kinds of numbers, which tells me they're just not, they're trying to produce the headline. That is their job.
That's 100%. And they're trying to produce the headline to promote their public pension scenarios.
It's the National Institute for Retirement Security. This is not like the ivory tower or something. They are, I hate to say it, they're the propaganda arm of the defined benefit pensions industry, particularly public sector. So they want to make it seem, especially if you go back 10 years or so, there's a big push on public sector pensions, particularly how generous they are. They're really generous.
Right.
And so the strategy that the industry took, and when I mean the industry, I'm talking not just the pension plans, I'm like public employee unions, the actuarial firms, the financial consultants, the investment people who make tons of money from all the investments that public pensions do. Their strategy was, instead of defending the generosity of our own pensions, we just want to make it seem like things are terrible everywhere else. Yeah. So you get all these studies, all Americans, unless they have one of our pensions, they're going to die in retirement or whatever. It's all kind of just really, it's just propaganda, and it's very low end stuff. But it's one of those things they're smart enough to know better. And because they can pull the data and run it, but I'm like, come on, just be honest, guys.
They're trying to. It's always for click. I get that, but the real clicks are the debate. I mean, just look at professional wrestling, man, because this is basically professional wrestling. It's just all it is. Yeah. They're just making crap up. But I'm just like, if you really want the clicks, you'd have an Andrew over here and a freaking Stephanie Kelton over there. Not say
they won't. It's by and large, these guys won't.
No, they can't because they're full of crap. That's the thing. They can't because they're not truth tellers.
If you want to look, this is probably 4 years ago now. The Wall Street Journal sponsored a debate on the retirement crisis between me and Teresa Ghilarducci, who is a very nice person.
Andrew, hold on, Jim. I got to interrupt this. Just hold on a second. I got to show you this quote. Hang on. Right. Andrew, you're clueless. Thousands of seniors are losing their house into inflation.
If he has a footnote for that, then
there is no footnote of it. It's just it's Peter Schiff all over again. It's David Stockman. I can't take it. Anyway, go ahead.
There's almost no measure of financial security, whether it's like a data-based measure like poverty or something like that, or like a survey measure where you ask people, how are you doing financially, or could you handle an unexpected expense, or do you have a rainy day fund? There's almost no financial measure where retirees are worse off than working age.
There is none. It's idiot. Actually, it's funny. To go along with one of your things that you quote, which you cited, was this piece by Mitchell and B, Joshua Mitchell and Andy B, about right here. You can see my screen, right? Or no? I can't.
I can see it.
Anyway, so this is the piece that kind of blew up the whole Social Security is providing 90% of the income for 50% or more people. Anyway, one of the things that was interesting in here, and I don't know if I highlighted it, I think I might have, but they say homeowners with a mortgage are the retired homeowners without a mortgage. Man, I know I highlighted it right here. The housing tenure, a useful survey-based proxy for wealth. The survey shows considerably higher poverty rates for those who own a home without a mortgage. I thought that was very interesting. But even this is only 7.3%. I mean, just like, come on, freaking whoever that guy was, just pull that.
The key thing on that study, I wrote a piece in the Wall Street Journal about 2012, and saying that you get these surveys of poverty, the poverty rate for older people, or they look at how much people depend on Social Security, and the data they use, the Census Bureau data they use for that, for the most part, doesn't count retirement account withdrawals as income, which would strike you. If you're sitting there, you're like, you think it can't be true. But what we did is we looked at the total amount of like retirement plan income in what's called the current population survey they used for this. for the poverty rate and all that, and we compared it to the total amount reported by seniors to the IRS. Because the IRS, they don't care how you're getting your money.
Right.
It was like twice as much in the IRS day. They're just missing it. So people say, look, if poverty is high among seniors, and it's because IRAs, 401ks don't work. I'm like, you're literally not counting the benefits they're getting from these. And it's like, you can't believe it's true, but it is true. And this census, the Census Bureau has done a lot of good work on this.
Right.
So this study that came out, when I did this piece in the journal, people were like, oh, you must be lying or whatever.
Yeah, 2012. I read that thing.
Like
That's
5 years later, Census comes out with a study where they could take this data used for the poverty rate and all that, but then they could, because they have this data, they match it up to people's tax returns, so they know in fact how much income you got. What they found is it's the median income of people age 65 and over, when you capture their full income, including all retirement plan benefits, is like 30% higher than it is in this survey they used to calculate the poverty rate. It's nuts.
It is
nuts. And you would think this would be, holy moly, we didn't know it. Our retirement situation is completely different than we previously thought. They've been the lowest poverty of any group. Their incomes are at record high levels. You'd think that would change the dynamic. It changed the dynamic not one bit. Yeah, the entire thing you'd hear from Bernie Sanders or whoever, people about retirement crisis, it didn't change their narrative at all. And it just shows, I think, the fundamental thing where the narrative comes first and the facts come afterwards. I mean, I hate to be so crass about it.
But it's true. Absolutely.
But there's people, it's like if God himself came down to earth and said, we don't have a retirement crisis, some of these people, they'd be like, covering their ears. They are so wedded to this idea.
Well, there's a guy who writes in the Advisor Perspective who I read. I just don't like this guy. It's a guy named William Bernstein, and not the Bernstein of,
Woodward and.
No, there's another Bernstein of not the hell from Capum or something. Not that guy. Anyways, but it's another guy named William Bernstein. He's writing it with my man from Santa Clara. Now I can't remember that guy's name. Anyway. And they just wrote this thing, and they wrote a book saying the same Social Security numbers. And I have a relationship with this other guy. I can't remember. I sent him to you, actually, Andrew. I forgot his name. I've drawn a blank. From Santa Clara. Is a professor emeritus at Santa Clara. Great guy. Big lib, but great guy. And I said, whatever his name is, Ed. And I said, man, you're wrong, dude. Your numbers are antiquated. This has been addressed a million times. Yeah. This guy, William Bernstein, thinks he's all that in a bag of chips. And I don't like him, but the other guy I do like. I said, don't attach your flag to him, because when you produce his book, it's going to be easily disputed with real live numbers. And actually, he said I don't know if he talked to you or emailed you or even just looked at your stuff. He goes, yeah, that guy Andrew Biggs a tough cookie. I said, I know he is. Man, so retract your stupid stuff. And again, I say this with all love. I love this guy, but I just can't remember his name. Anyway,
the debates become much easier when you in fact have the facts on your side. I mean, it's like,
yes,
it is sort of on this sort of general debate of retirement preparation. I mean, it of sort of think tank people are sort of right for the popular audience. I'm kind of the only guy who pushes this. There are tons of academics who basically agree with me. But it is a little bit weird in the sense of like me against all these different people with a retirement crisis narrative. But I have this, allies on my team, which is the facts.
Right.
I mean, it really is easy. I'm like, no, you got this and this and this and this. Right. And so just to go back, if you're interested in actually seeing a debate on this,
yes.
Wall Street Journal is me and Teresa Gilliard, she probably 4 years ago. And look, she's bright, but it just
probably a nice person. Yeah.
Very, very nice person. But at the end of the day, people will watch for themselves. But I think I handled it just fine.
But was it actually a live debate or just like
if you're right, it's easier to argue a correct point than an incorrect point. And I think that's just it. It's just the data don't show the story these guys are trying to show.
So on the debate with you and her, was it like a live on air thing, or was it?
Yeah, you can still find it. I could find a link to it. I'll find the link and send it to you. But I think it was actually, no, it wasn't done live. It was done to tape.
No, but it's on a video though, is what I'm saying. Like it wasn't via email or anything like that, or it was actually
No, yeah, it was live. It was live.
Okay.
I just saw a question flash.
Yeah, I'm going to ask you this, Andrew. Andrew keeps referencing other countries that have much lower retirement benefits. How much did they pay in? Maybe that's why the world wants to come to America, because our standard of living is higher. So how much did the Australians, Canadians, the Brits pay into Social Security relative to their low pay?
Australia's not funded by payroll tax. It's funded by general revenues. The cost of their public system is about a third of Social Security. UK, their national insurance tax is similar to ours. It's a little hard because there's other stuff wrapped into it, like their health system. Canada's payroll tax it's 10%, and it goes up to like the first $75,000 in earnings.
Yeah.
But maybe it hit the substantive point. People are saying, how much do they pay? Look, I know this isn't it's an intuitive question to ask. I'm not saying like you got to be dumb to ask the question, but I would start at the end and just say, okay, how much government pension benefits should go to somebody who's well off in retirement?
Right.
And justify that and say, okay, how much should we be paying these guys? Because I'm not talking about cutting people off today if I can avoid it, barring the 2032 problem. I'm just saying, if you're doing Social Security reform today, you're planning out decades in the future. So we're not just saying how much benefits do we honor for people who've already paid, and we're saying how much should we promise for the future? Somebody who's entering the workforce today, 50 years from now they retire, how much should they get? And that question, you got to say, well, what is the purpose of a big Social Security benefit for somebody like that? Now, look, if they're rich all their lives and something terrible happens to them in retirement, yeah, I want a safety net for them. But do they need $100,000 a year? I mean, by 2050, the maximum Social Security benefit for a couple is be $132,000 a year. And I'll just say, you got to be out of your mind to think we need to be paying that at a time when the federal government's going to be broke as a joke. It makes no sense. So it's a lot of this gets, when you talk about benefits for high income people, they're not thinking public policy. And I'll say, I'm not a financial planner or whatever. I'm a public policy person. I'm just saying, why are we doing, some activity? And so if you're somebody who's on the verge of retirement, I understand, okay, you don't want to have the rug pulled out from under you, and I don't want to do that either. The question is, do we keep promising ever increasing benefits? I wrote a piece in the Journal a couple of years ago. I said, if the maximum benefit's $100,000 a year for a couple, cap it at that. Just say enough is enough.
Yeah, I know what I'm saying.
The really weird thing is that, we think of ourselves as this free market country, and these other guys are all socialists or whatever. Every country has a safety net for poor people. In my view, the socialist country is the one that's having massive government benefits for rich people instead of letting them save on their own. And in that context, again, our maximum benefit, I've cited these other countries like Australia, UK, Canada, Ireland. Our maximum benefit is 3 times higher than theirs.
Yeah.
And we have the richest retirees on earth. It just doesn't stand up to any reasoning of why you do public policy.
Well, Penelope is one of your fans, and she's a big lib, and I'm just goofing, but I love Penelope. But she says no one should get $100,000 in Social Security, and
Penelope's very smart. I'm just going to say that.
Oh, come on, Andrew. Now it's going to be like,
thank you for your support and your attention to this matter.
He's the only one. All right, so I got some comments and questions here. We already talked about that one. My man gave us a $5 super sticker. If you got one life to live, if you have a question for Andrew, one life to live, we'll put you up front of queue. We talk about this. All right, right here. I remember a white paper. This is Katie Kayaks or Kayaks or whatever the hell it's called, that proposed child rearing age, the tax rates for single and married should be the same. I guess I'm confused by that. So I guess she's saying we shouldn't have, everyone has this, there shouldn't be a marriage filing jointly. I'm confused by that.
Yeah, I don't know.
When AI takes over and nobody works. Oh God.
You got a problem, man.
Are you at all worried about AI taking your job?
Not my job, but other jobs, yeah. I mean, it's just it is what I suggest, and it makes capital more productive. And you think back to wheat threshers or
Right.
whatever. You had machines replacing
Mhm.
employees. So
Combines, man.
that's an argument where I'd say, okay, you want to be saving more because that's going to be higher returns to the capital side of things. You want to be in that game.
That's interesting, man. That's a so you actually think the capital will get better returns because AI makes it more efficient and thus more
Yes.
profitable for
Yeah, I mean,
capital.
it's just okay. Think of airline reservation or customer service or something like that. That's something AI can do. Okay, so then you're still going to pay the same amount for your airline ticket, presumably, but that money's
Maybe
going to go to
not.
the
Maybe pay lower because
yeah,
it's
maybe you pay
less.
less, but whatever you pay is going to go to
Right.
more of it's going to go to the airline who owns the AI machine, less of it to the customer service because there'll be fewer of them. So I'm just saying you want to have a slice of that pie.
You know what I'm saying?
It's really hard to say how all this stuff really plays out, but it strikes me you want to have both sides. You don't want to have all your income coming from labor. You want to have some investment income.
Well, man, I could not agree more. It's actually, you ever heard of Clay Travis, the sports guy? You follow sports at all, Andrew? All right. He actually replaced Rush Limbaugh. Him and Buck Owens or whatever his name is. Anyway, and he talked about last night. Very interesting, actually. He bought a Tesla. And he's not a big lib. He's not a big greenie because the self-driving.
Yeah, and I thought about it for just that purpose. I don't love the cars, but the self-driving.
Yeah, I mean, and you think about how many like limousine drivers that take you to the airport. So in Atlanta, it freaking sucks to go to the airport, man. You know what I'm saying? So we hire, when the whole family goes, we hire a whole big old thing because we got family of 6. You see what I'm saying? And so when you get that labor cost is the number one cost for a business. And when that labor goes away, it's going to be profitable for the capital owners.
The standard explanation is, okay, I mean, the wheat combine or whatever, or the cotton gin, or all these things, they replaced workers. There were other very productive things for those workers to do.
Absolutely were.
Concern, and there's always a concern, what else can they do? And there always were things they could do. My concern is, I mean, again, you look at quality of education in the U.S., you're like, are we running out of things for them to do? And, you could say, okay, well, there'd be emphasis on, manual labor, being a plumber, electrician, things that AI can't do. The problem is if you get people laid off from jobs, sort of white collar thing because of AI, then they're going to start flooding into blue collar jobs, which is, the oversupply of labor is going to reduce the wages there.
Oh, wait a second. An AEI guy, excuse me, Andrew, did you just say the oversupply of labor reduces wages as a person who writes for the American Enterprise Institute? Did I just hear that?
We don't have institutional points of view, so I just say whatever I think. No, and I'm not completely I'm not on board on every topic. And people that disagree with me on this. We are not like other think tanks where they say, okay, here's where you're going to be.
I love AEI. That's debate your man.
What they think.
This guy right here. Do you know who Scott Winship is?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
He's a very smart guy.
Say again?
He's a very smart guy. He's got this sort of narrative that's similar to mine. My thing is I'm always dealing with these people are saying, oh, retirement crisis, everything's terrible. He's got the same thing. People saying, oh, well, it takes 2 workers to get the same standard of living as, one, like the husband could have done by himself 50 years ago. He's like, if you actually look at the standard of living people, like half the people in America didn't have indoor plumbing. So having that second worker was kind of helpful. Actually, he's a very, very bright guy.
I'm going back and forth with him on his CPI stuff because I completely agree the way we measure inflation is stupid. But be that as it may, it's just I got a paper up his right here on my dashboard thing.
He's a really interesting writer.
Yeah, 100%. I think he's unequivocally wrong in his way he looks at this in terms of median wages. But be that as it may, and I'm just joking. You don't represent I get that. All right, so we got this lady right here. Oh, there's Katie again. All right, so good job, Katie. Don't get a lot of ladies on here. It's mostly a well, I don't want to say anything crude with Andrew here, but the UK has national health care. So the lower old age benefits are more palatable there, says she.
Okay, well, then maybe we should have single payer health care for retirees in America. Oh, we do have single payer. I mean, look, it is in, I mean, and I'm not just trying to be mocking or whatever, but when you do these international comparisons, people say, well, okay, but they have a bigger welfare state and all that we do. I'm like, except for seniors.
Right.
I mean, I went to college and grad school in the UK. I mean, I've got some admiration for the NHS. I mean, they do a good job and it's cheap. At the same time, Medicare is so much more generous than the NHS in the UK. You have no idea.
Yeah, 100%.
UK, as far as I know, doesn't have any long-term care insurance. Here we got Medicaid, which is going to cover it for people. I mean, it's
single payer is evil. It's evil, evil, evil. My dad, believe it or not, Andrew, used to write with John Goodman, and he was at Cato. My dad was talking about patient power, and single payer healthcare is freaking evil. It's rationing. There's no two ways around that, and I hate it. And I'll never be a proponent of single care. The interesting thing I think people forget is, or maybe they don't know, Mississippi is actually more economically sound in terms of per capita income than the UK is now. Literally,
I've read these things, and they say, "Oh, it's much richer than Canada and all that." And look, I understand how the numbers are produced. Something in me doesn't believe it, but I've never really spent the time to think about it. But I will say this: I mean, I went to college in Ireland and grad school in England, and again, this is going back a bit. Right. But when you do that, and UK is not a poor country, but you realize how rich Americans are.
Yeah, well, man,
even compared to places like the UK, we're rich.
Oh,
and I don't know exactly why that is, but you do see, for all the people who are saying, "Oh, America, we're stagnant" and all that. Look, we got a lot of problems. You look at the past 20 years, the complete divergence in incomes and GDP growth between the US and Europe. And you look at all the big, we're growing much faster. All your big tech firms, innovations, all American. And, you can't say it's just one thing. People say, well, that's a low capital gains rate. I mean, no, it's a lot of things.
Well, we people who want to crush, they come here. You see what I'm saying? Like I'm Irish and German. They came here to crush. These Indians are coming here to crush. Yeah, there's some Somalis, I get all that. But generally speaking, the people who are the cream of the crop of these foreign countries come here to kick ass and take names.
Something like immigration policy. And this, again, I'm not really, I'm not an expert on it all. But I'm not really on board with some other, people at AEI. But, we are like the Harvard of countries. I mean, Harvard can attract whoever it wants to go to Harvard. If we wanted every PhD in the country of Sweden and say, "Hey, you want to come here?" They're like, "Okay, we're here." Yeah. And so it does. When I think about this stuff, let me put it this way: is when we think about sort of low-skilled immigration, I say, okay, if we had this huge demand for that, you should have seen in the past wages rising in the areas in which immigrants work. Like drywall, construction, things like that. Wages should have been rising because there's a shortage of people to do it. In fact, wages were falling. So it's, and you think how much we spend in the schools to try to prevent people from graduating high school with an 8th grade education, 8th grade level of skills. Well, that's, if you're having low skilled immigration, that's in fact, you're saying we're going to spend trillions to prevent it here, but somehow we need more people here. But the issue is, we could get whoever we want.
No, 100%.
A lot of people want to live here, as crap as it is in some ways. People like living here.
But you're married to an immigrant, aren't you? Is she an immigrant?
No, she's from Oregon.
Oregon. So she's an immigrant.
No. No, I'll speak to her about that. But no, she is.
She needs to be deported. My man Sergio asked a good question. Will an increase in the income limits on FICA tax? Increase the income limits on FICA tax. with an additional fourth bend point, add anything to the fund. So if we raise the taxes, we got rid of the caps and we added a fourth bend point, let's say 3%. Would that do anything, do you think?
Well, sure, but it's at that point, I'm like, don't even add the bend point. Don't say we're going to, tax you 12% and then pay 3% back. Just tax them. Right. It's this fig leaf of saying, well, we're not breaking the link between taxes and benefits, but at the guy at the bottom, the first bend point, he's getting a 90% replacement rate, and you're gonna say, okay, at the margin, this guy's get 3%. Just if you're gonna raise taxes, just raise taxes. But the issue, so you will get extra money. There's a couple things that go on.
Right.
Let's say we just eliminate the cap on payroll taxes. That means essentially your top rate on earned income is rising by 12 percentage points, which is a lot of money. 6 percentage points that are paid by your employer. Yep. What both Social Security and Congressional Budget Office and most economists agree is what happens. The employer is going to reduce your wages to cover that.
Has to. He doesn't have money.
It's just not. And I mean, it's both economic theory and evidence. So that's what you're going to do. The interesting thing, though, is when they do that, when they reduce your wages, people are no longer paying federal income taxes in those wages, no longer paying Medicare taxes in those wages. And these are people are paying high rates.
Interesting.
So you're reducing wages among people for whom their non-Social Security taxes are high. So you're losing money.
I never even thought about that.
And then you got to say, how big is the behavioral response? How much are people in response to that extra amount they're paying? How much are they going to reduce their own work effort and all that? But if you get some of that, you end up netting a lot less than you think you're going to get.
That's,
so it's, I talked to the people on the Hill Congressional Committee recently. I'm like, we got to get like Joint Economic Committee or Joint Tax Committee will be the right people and really model this out, because it's lifting the payroll tax ceiling affects not just Social Security, but affects Medicare revenues, income tax revenues. It's a complicated kind of thing. So the answer is you'll get something. I would think you would net probably half of the gross. So whatever you think you're going to get, you're probably half of that amount. That's my guess.
Well, that's an interesting. I never thought about that too. It's like
in a static sense, if you eliminate the payroll tax ceiling entirely and you pay no benefits, I think they claim that'll fix around 2/3 of the long-term Social Security funding gap. So if you would net only half of that, you say, okay, you get 1/3 of it. So you still 2/3 of the funding problem to deal with. But what you've done at that point, you have tapped out high earners. Yeah. You're not going to get it. You're probably not going to get that full 12% on the high earners anyway. But if you did get it, you're not getting an extra penny out of them. That's it. No. What it means is then anything else that has to happen, fixing Medicare or Medicaid or any new spending programs, all of that has to come from tax increases on low and middle income workers, which is, look, that's how it is in Europe. You have a VAT or something, but this is why you just want to cut benefits for rich people. Because if you do that, going back to the original paper, you could pay a couple up to $48,000 a year in Social Security benefits. In other words, this safety net is going to pay 2.5 times the poverty threshold before you touch a penny of your own benefits. We can do that and not have to raise taxes at all, which leaves room for all these other things. But I just think it's nuts to say, okay, we're gonna tap out high income people in order to pay just ridiculously unnecessary levels of benefits to high income people. Just let them be.
The two most evil thoughts in America going forward will be a VAT and single payer healthcare. So we should really put tooth and nail against.
If I had to say, we probably end up with a VAT, single payer, probably not, but a VAT we probably do.
All right, Jeremy says
if they were better at policy making, you wouldn't. None of this. Some of healthcare is complicated. Social Security is easy,
right?
And yet you don't see any. When I talk to members of Congress, you are not seeing conversation at anything approaching this level of detail or sophistication. Not at all. And that's the worrying thing, because you think they may be furiously working behind the scenes. They got some super plan coming up. I'm like, I don't think so.
I mean,
so that's the thing to be scared about.
Jasmine Crockett in the Congress, Andrew. Come on, Jasmine. I mean,
she knows what she wants to do. So it's.
I mean, she's not sitting there, and she's actually probably a smart lady because she went to some elite prep school in Missouri or something like that. But let's just use her aura of trying to be gangster. She's not freaking, and her and Maxine Waters aren't getting together with Dan Crenshaw and Marjorie Taylor Greene and ironing out some Social Security fix. It's just not happening. So it's got to come from the commission, and we'll just close up here.
Yeah, you got out. It's basically, this is the admission. The commission is the admission that Congress can't do what's supposed to.
What I'm saying, absolutely.
But it is true Congress can't do this stuff. So you might as well have the commission.
I mean, because we know for a fact they can't. So let's get the commission and get it done. All right, Andrew, I appreciate you being here, man. Any last thoughts? I mean, I'll put links to your Substack and all that. Last thoughts, comments, and we'll get you on the rest of your day. But, man, again, appreciate you coming on board again. It's fun.
I'm always happy to be here, and thank you, everybody, for watching.
So Andrew can be found at Substack, folks. I will get his thing out there, and you'll see the show notes and all that. You can subscribe; don't cost anything. If you want to throw Andrew some coin, you can. But and then you can find him on just look at AEI, and I'll put links on there too. All right, God bless, man. Andrew, hang tight for just a second. All right.